today's interesting session on introduction to ESG. To handle this, we have an eminent speaker, none other than CA Pradeep from BDO India. As you all know, ESG is in a still budding stage. It may take off in 22, 23, but some of the listed companies, very large industries, already started reporting on ESG. But financial year 2023, it will make it compulsory for listed companies. But it's all ESG reporting is all about making difference. Industry as a whole, as an environment friendly, and what is the contribution we are going to leave for our next generation through our business, not hampering everything. Very interesting reporting. It's a very budding stage. We are interested here on that topic. Even ICA Delhi also has come out with the exposure draft on standards on sustainability assurance. It's a draft, exposure draft has come. I request members to reply for that your opinions. Generally, all the members would have been received that exposure draft. I request all the members to reply for that. With this, I once again welcome CA Pradeep sir for this program. Thank you, sir. Once again I welcome all the members for this program. I request our secretary CA Pramod to give an introduction of our today's speaker, Mr. Pradeep. Over to Pramod.
Thank you, Chairman. I take the privilege in introducing Mr. CA Pradeep Suresh, whose educational qualification and professional qualification include Chartered Accountant from ICAI, Associate from ECCA UK, Certified Valuer, and Bachelors of Commerce. He is a partner with Accounting Advisory Services practice and leads the practice nationally. He represents BDO India on the Global IFRS Policy Committee of the firm. He operates out of Bangalore office and has more than 18 years of experience in financial reporting advisory and audit services under Indian GAAP and IFRS as well. He is part of the Central Audit QR team and is the leader of the global consultation for the firm. He has successfully managed many audit and GAAP conversion assignments and worked as a subject matter expert in resolving complex accounting issues with respect to revenue recognition, business combination, and consolidation under Indian GAAP and IFRS. He has also handled engagements of advisory projects with respect to preparation of carve-out and pro forma financial information and has led information project in relation to compliance for a multinational company for the APAC region. In this process, he has collaborated with other work locations outside India. In his previous organization, he had been a significant contributor to the learning solution service offering. He has imparted training on various occasions to large corporates and retail customers. He has also played a key role in the knowledge management initiative, including writing media articles throughout the leadership publication and newsletters for the organization. He led the audit of an SEC-listed large multinational in the diverse industrial product segment. He has also led statutory reporting project for one of the largest retailers in the world. He has led a GAAP conversion for one of the largest real estate developers in India and also on project of carve-out financial statements for the listed entity for a large multinational in IFRS. With this brief introduction, I welcome you again, sir. I hereby present to you all CA Pradeep Suresh, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Srinivas and Pramod. It's indeed an honor to be part of this session and speak of a topic which is very close to my heart, which is ESG. And what I will try to do as part of this study circle meet is to at least just give a glimpse of what ESG is by way of introducing you, all the participants, to what it really means. Is it just reporting, or are we talking about something more than just reporting? And I would like to welcome all the ladies and gentlemen who have joined in today to hear me out. And I really appreciate taking time out for this topic, given the busy season we all are in. And I hope over the next 1.5 hours, I'm able to make a small difference in the way you think in terms of how you interact with your businesses, how you do your reporting, your day-to-day activities when you become conscious and responsible for whatever impact you are having on the environment and also the businesses that you're part of, right? So that's a little bit of consciousness and responsibility if I can impart in some of you today, and also introduce you to the ESG reporting aspects as well as a later part of this session. I think that would be achieving more or less all the objective of this today's session. I think it's quite imperative for us to be able to appreciate the actual meaning of ESG, so as to be able to understand why ESG reporting is complex, why ESG reporting is really necessary today in today's time. Everything is going very well. The current industrial revolution that started many decades ago is continuing to prosper. A lot of countries our GDPs are growing by billions and trillions of dollars, but what is the issue today? Why are we talking about ESG? Why are we talking about environmental hazard and so on and so forth, right? So, so far, since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and the knowledge revolution that we all know of, we've always been targeting to meet the immediate needs of ourselves. And in that process, the innovation, the development that has happened, the inventions of certain things and activities have been so useful for us over the last few decades and centuries that we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we've achieved today so far without those inventions and those developmental activities. But having said that, why are we now rethinking about this? The Industrial Revolution 4.0, as we know it, is now going to think of what are the impacts of these developments on the environment, on the planet, and also on the people. When it comes to the new revolution that we are talking about, any new inventions and developments that we are planning to have as part of our business growth, and how that is going to impact the environment and the planet. So our today's session is going to give you a brief introduction about what is ESG, why are we talking about ESG, and briefly give you a glimpse of how ESG can be integrated into the business activities of a company. And then finally, we will talk about ESG reporting and then the assurance on the ESG reporting. So let's talk about why are we talking about ESG today? Why is this a critical thing today? You've heard about World Economic Forum, and this is one of the most important collaboration of different countries that happen over a few days, where global risks are actually discussed, and not just economic, developmental, and even environmental risks are discussed at greater length. And as a group of collaborative countries, we then come up with certain commitments for having to meet over a period of time so that the collective goal of mitigating those risks are achieved, right? And in advance of the World Economic Forum meets that happen, there is a risk report which is issued by the organization. And that report is referred to as the Global Risk Report. And this is available on their website every year, right? And so you've got in their archives, for at least over a decade, the risk reports. And what it endeavors to do is bases all the researches that they do, researches that have actually happened across different countries who are part of the World Economic Forum, and also the surveys that the WEF does, which is heavily participated by different conglomerates across the world. It gives a good insight about what are the risks that we are facing today. We're not just talking about businesses, we are talking about mankind. What are we as a group of people spread across different geographies, political regions, and different income backgrounds? what are the key risks that we are facing today globally, and it also endeavors to give some sort of a rating to each of those risks. So there is a complicated way in which they do an assessment of a risk, its likelihood and impact, and basis their research and methodologies, they then give out a list of risks that we are posed today, and it also gives an assessment of when these risks are going to materialize and it is going to impact us. Now, why do you think this is relevant today? Because the risks that are going to be impacting mankind over a period of time needs to be, first of all, acknowledged today, and also needs to be it needs to be inside your business thinking and also strategy. So it is not only for businesses, and like I said, it is also for countries to design their policies for various aspects that the countries sign up to. You may have heard about COP26, which happened last year in November. There is a COP27, which is happening a few weeks down the line in November first week in Egypt, where all the participating countries, nearly 190 odd countries, leaders come there and meet, and all countries provide a commitment to meeting certain targets which have been agreed in the World Economic Forum, right? So these targets are very, very fundamental, not just for businesses, but for our existence, right? We are talking about targets for net zero emissions. We are talking about targets for, generating energy, not from non-renewable sources, but from renewable sources. And we agree on those targets and sign up in that meeting. And we are committed, or each country is committed to achieving those targets. Right now, when you look at the Global Risk Report of 2022, and here, of course, it has a wide variety of those risks that are enumerated there, with a pattern or a spread of when it is going to impact the world. I'm only bringing the top 4 of the risks in each aging bucket, right? So we are talking about 0 to 2 years, 2 to 5 years, and 5 to 10 years into the future. What are the risks that are going to impact us in each of these buckets, right? So, the Global Risk Report has some sort of a categorization of risk, and they deal with 5 types of risks when it comes to the preparation of this report. Those 5 types are discussed on the top of the slide. If you're talking about economic risks, environmental risks, geopolitical, societal, and technological risks. So you would see that this assessment of risk is quite elaborate and broad, so as to cover all aspects which are relevant for the purpose of the well-being of mankind itself, right? So now, if you were to look at the top 4 risks that are going to hit us over the next 10 years, you would see that there is a lot of discussion about environmental risk. 0 to 2 years, I'm just reading out, the highest rated risk in terms of likelihood and impact was the extreme weather, right? And you would recall from all the news reports that you've read in the recent past, India has not been has not been exempted, right? We in Bangalore have received significant rainfall. There is flooding across different parts of the country. Europe has seen unprecedented summers this time, which is quite unlike of that region to have that high degrees of temperature. Water level increasing, and the overall temperature of the globe increasing year on year, and which has resulted in extreme weather being a significant impact across different countries in different ways. Like, for example, Australia had the fire, and there's earthquakes in Nepal and other countries, and therefore extreme weather was classified as one of the highest rated risk which is going to impact us over the next 0 to 2 years, right? Livelihood crisis, we're talking about poverty, we're talking about economies dwindling, unable to support the existing population in that country. Climate action failure is considered to be a big risk. One example is India had committed for a net zero a target for 2050, but last year in COP26, we extended that time period to 2070, and we're talking about 20 more years being included in that runway, right? So that means that we are not going to meet those targets which we set for ourselves, which was committed to the rest of the world. And we're not the only one, right? There are other countries as well who have not been able to meet those targets and are extending their end time as well. But the climate action failure is not going to stop. It is going to continue, and you would see that that is one of the highest risks you're seeing in 2 to 5 years and 5 to 10 years, right? And climate action failure has a cascading impact. It just not talk about your failure to address those issues today. Your business strategy, your product development strategy, and the way you interact and use resources are also going to be at question for at least the next 5 to 10 years, right? So that is also considered to be a very high risk in the report. And social cohesion erosion. So we are talking about lesser cooperation. We're talking today of two wars, the Ukraine war, and there's one now at Azerbaijan. So there are quite a lot of things happening today which are actually resonating to what is already written in that report. It's not astrology. It's more to do with what the group of companies, the participants to this report surveys are thinking about what will happen in the near future, and these are based on real technical backing, a lot of research material, right? And you would see the color coding here is green is environmental risk, red is societal risk, right? I'm only talking about the top 4 risks across the different buckets. You would see that the green categorization, which is the environmental risk, is there in the top 4 in all the years, right? So we're talking about, and you would see in 5 to 10, it's only that, right? So this only means that we need to now start thinking about environmental risk very seriously. Now, this is not just theory. Now, we have seen the impact of water level rising, global warming, and a lot of gas emissions, and all of that is reality today, right? Something which never was a priority during the Industrial Revolution or even a few decades back has come to bite us today in terms of these extreme weathers, climate action failures, and many more, which are going to bite us even in the near future. And therefore, it is important that we first of all acknowledge that environmental risk is for real. And I think that is something we all are responsible for. We as individuals also contribute to the economy in different forms. We consume the products that the large conglomerates manufacture, we consume services, and so on and so forth. So we are a very integral part of the whole economy and the system we are in, right? So you cannot be ignorant and state that this is something that the government needs to look at. This is something that the companies need to do, right? No, it's not that. Companies are valued by people like us. We are investors. We are users of the products that they manufacture. Governments are formed because we vote for them. So we are a significant part of this whole journey, right? So the global risk report is something that I would request and urge each one of us to have a look at. It's a good eye opener. It gives you a lot of data points, and it also proves a lot of things which you hear as an abstract subject, and it gives you a lot of data points basis which you could also then naturally conclude that yes, environmental risk is not abstract, it is real, and it is here to stay, right? And the only way to manage an environmental risk is to internalize that, right? In your process of business making, in your process of thinking, in your process of report writing, right? And only then would you see that your thought process is changing, your behavior would naturally change, right? And therefore you change the behavior of the government, you change the behavior of the reporting entities, your clients, and the businesses that you're running, right? So this slide is only to introduce you to the fact that environmental risk is high priority today, and it is not an abstract thing that we have always been speaking about. And we all as individuals and as business owners and as chartered accountants have a significant role to play in this whole journey to mitigate the risks that are coming out of the businesses that we run, the behaviors that we have. right? And in this whole process, it is not just one country against the other. It's not about one company against the other. It's the whole mankind that needs to get together, join hands to make sure that Earth is habitable for the future generations, right? So the word sustainability, right, so has been spoken about at different forums. Many companies give it a different color, and they, because of the different reporting frameworks that are currently existing, sustainability has different meanings under different frameworks. But the underpinning definition or the underpinning understanding of the word sustainability was defined by a UN commission way back, at least 30 years back, when it said sustainability is that thing which is to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs, right? It's a beautiful definition. So it you know, you may garnish it with a lot more lingo, a lot more complicated words, but ultimately the underpinning definition of sustainability is this, right? Meet your current needs without jeopardizing the future generations ability to meet their needs, right? So we're talking about, let's say, petrol, we're talking about non-renewable sources of energy. Yeah, we are consuming at a rate which is unprecedented. Our populations are growing, the needs of the population is growing, there is a lot of wastage, and all of that adds up to the fact that the sources of energy that we're consuming today may not live beyond the current century or the next 50-60 years. So what does that mean? What happens when we run out of our resources of such kind, right? So it could deprive the ability of future generations to actually use such resources which we thought are priceless. Today there are nations, regions, continents who make a lot of value out of such you know, non-renewable sources being available as deposits with them, but may not have been, you know, thinking so much about what happens if that resource is depleted, right? And that's where we have to start thinking, right? So we need to now start thinking about sustainable ways of living, sustainable ways of doing business, and sustainability in everything that you do, right? So sustainability is defined in the UN Commission, and that's a broad definition of sustainability. And like I mentioned, each framework which speaks of sustainability reporting has its own version of sustainability, but overall it all means the same, right? So this is the first slide. I just wanted to introduce you to the global risk that we as human beings are facing, regardless of whether you're an Indian, you are a Bangladeshi, it doesn't really matter. We all are going to face these global risks. The level and the impact of that could be different for different countries, but it's quite unfortunate that we'll have to go through this phase. But it was only inevitable given the way we have done the development over the past centuries and the way we were thinking at those times. Now, given this scenario, the risk report states that environmental risk is going to be highest in terms of global impact and global likelihood, right? Now let's move on to the next slide. Let's briefly introduce you to the concept of ESG, right? Now, that's what we are here to talk about. But ESG and sustainability are the same thing. It's just a different lingo, right? ESG is more towards the investor terminology, and they've always used ESG as something that they assess of the investee companies, and that has now picked up in terms of acceptability by the rest of the world, and that's how ESG has become something as a reference point for sustainability. Now, we as chartered accountants and the accounting fraternity at large, we have understood performance of a company in terms of numbers, right? What's your return on investment? How much profit are you making? What's your EBITDA? What's your debtor turnover ratio? And so on and so forth, right? And that is how we have always assessed the performance of a company. Even today, valuation of a company is still determined in terms of rupees, in terms of dollars, in terms of pounds, right? We are trying to ascribe a value to everything which could be tangible, which could be intangible, which adds value to the company's business, right? To determine what is their overall value, right? But now slowly the thought process is different today, and it is changing, right? We are not just talking about the bottom line, right, which is the financial performance. We're now talking about triple bottom line, which is another kind of lingo that you would see when you do research on ESG matters, right? So when you say triple bottom line, what are we talking about? We are talking about not just about your financial profits. We are talking about your environmental performance. We are talking about your social performance as well, right? Now you would say, okay, environmental performance, that cannot always be quantified in terms of rupees or a currency. Social performance can also not be finally concluded in terms of INR or dollars, right? So yes, that is correct. But having said that, would you think that the environmental performance and the social performance live in a different silo and does not have an impact on economic performance? Perhaps until now we have been thinking that way, right? So when the CSR policy came in, right? The fundamental reason why the CSR policy will not work in the given future is because CSR does not actually address the main problem, right? So if you're a corporate manufacturing plastic, right, which is not biodegradable, and you're requiring the such company to participate in CSR activity, it will do so because it's a regulatory requirement, and you may be perhaps penalized for not having contributed or not having shown some sort of an activity in the CSR area, and that's it. So you still continue to manufacture plastic, right? And you're doing your thing, which could potentially impact environmentally, and it could perhaps be irreversible, right? But you're let go because you're doing your CSR activity, right? Fine. CSR activity is the first step of acknowledging that yes, there is an environmental impact and you're responsible for the business conduct that you're into in your business area, right? But that as a principle would never work, right? So the company is not rethinking its business strategy. It is not getting penalized for the kind of the products that it is generating. It may perhaps be very profitable and therefore attracting better of everything, like lower interest rates on borrowings, better valuation on the stock exchange, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, you're actually destroying the environment, right? And therefore, CSR is not a fix for it, because that does not change or internalize the environmental impact as part of business development, as a part of business management and strategy development, right? So that is where now the thought process is moving into. The valuation or the corporate value, or it is also referred to as the enterprise value, is not just determined basis how profitable that company is, but how does it internalize its environmental impact and acknowledge the fact that it is actually causing certain risks and not just for environmental but also for social matters, that is people, planet, and profit, right? So all three put together would then naturally assign our enterprise value. Now it's really dotted lines, right? So it is not that environmental performance, okay, this is the issue multiplied by 5 times and that becomes your value. Now there's a converter and that converts that into a value which is monetary. So it's not like that. But having seen what has happened over the past, at least for the past 5 years, there's a separate index for sustainable for companies who are committing to sustainability, not just in India, across the world. And it has been consistently observed, regardless of whether you're a developing country or a developed country, the valuation that a company gets, which is listed on the sustainability index of a country, is higher than the rest of the listed entities in the market, right? It really means that the investors really value a company not just for the financial performance, but also the responsible conduct of the business, right? Now, the business is responsible for the environmental impact and the social impact it is causing, right? And the fact that a reporting entity or a business is acknowledging that, yes, whatever I'm doing has such impacts. And this is the risk that I'm associating with each of those types of impacts. And this is what I'm actually doing to mitigate those risks, is something that goes a long way when acceptability of the company is concerned, of its product is concerned in the market, right? So we're now talking about triple bottom line. We're not only talking about financial performance, we're talking about environmental and social performance as well, right? So now that is nothing but ESG, right? So ESG, like I said, is a terminology which is most commonly used by the investor community. And E and S and G are something that are playing a role in how a business strategy is determined, and which in turn results in how the investments are made, right? I'm talking from an investor standpoint. So what does E stand for? E stands for environment. We're talking about climate change, natural resources, whether they are renewable, non-renewable, how are you using it, how responsibly are you sourcing it, pollution, waste, and environmental opportunities, right? So today we're talking about not just, whether you're producing the best phones in the world, whether you're producing the best laptops in the world. We're talking about, okay, you produce the best of everything, but what are you doing after having manufactured it? What is the end use obligation that you carry? Right. So therefore, the regulation around e-waste has come, right, as to how do you dispose the products that you have sold, right, and how responsible are you in collecting such end use products and making them, they're disposing them in the right way so that the environment is not impacted. Now we have actually breached into a topic called circular economy. Now that is also something you would see as a very common phrase, or something that is really developing in the minds of people today. A circular economy is talking is in terms of using, recycling, refurbishing, and including used parts in making new ones at the end of the day, and selling and making the customers aware of the benefit of the circular economy, right? So that is something that is in the works right now, but that is nothing but an offshoot of what we are talking today in terms of environmental impact, and that is one way of mitigating those environmental impacts. Now let's talk about S. S is social, right? So when we're talking about social, we're talking about human capital. We're talking about the stakeholders. We're talking about the opposition, the social opportunities that your businesses are creating or you're putting at risk, right? So all of that becomes part of the S vertical, which is your social. Now we're talking about G as well, governance. Now governance is really is something to do with how does the business govern its business strategies and business models which address the risk and opportunities in environment and social sections, right? So governance is equally important. So we're not just talking about the risk and opportunities in environment and social, but also how does the company acknowledge, create policies around it, and how does the business behavior change considering the environmental and the social impacts that it is creating, right? So that is the ESG framework as such. Now you would slowly now start thinking on certain products that you use or on certain services that you use, what environmental impact does that product have, right? A simple thing, right? So today if you're purchasing a television, an LED TV, right, off Amazon, or just walk into a store and you buy it, the next day it gets delivered to you, right? And when you open the packing, you have the styrofoam. That styrofoam can never be recycled, right? And most of the time you're found struggling as to how you would dispose it, because it has no alternate use, right? It is kept only to keep the product intact so that it doesn't break, but it lands at your house as an unwanted guest. What do you do with it? You have no idea of how you should recycle. You can't burn it, it's hazardous. You can't use it for anything else, and you can't actually dispose of out in the open, right? And therefore you would start thinking, yes, now I purchased a TV which millions of people purchase every day, and there is something that I cannot recycle. The cardboard that it comes with, perhaps you could recycle, but first of all, yes, first of all, acknowledging that recycling is required itself is a win-win situation. Not many of us think that way. But now you are ended up with a product which, or an item which you, first of all, you did not want, and you cannot recycle, right? And when you start thinking on these lines, you will see that there are a lot of things that we do on a day-to-day activity, which you would start feeling towards, yes, these are the things that we should perhaps curtail, or perhaps we should not do, or perhaps penalize the company which is doing it in different ways, right? By not purchasing that product, or by not, valuing their shares slightly lower, right? So we have packaged food companies, right? So we order food at home. What you get along with the food is 200 grams of plastic, right? And what you do with that plastic is something which you cannot reuse, because the type of plastic is not so good, but you end up either recycling or just throwing it away, right? So the recycling management is something that again is the responsibility in a way of the individual who's consuming it, but a larger responsibility is cast on the organization which is using it, right? And you would also see this thought process getting imbibed in the various frameworks of reporting that I'm going to speak of today. When we are talking about, let's say, emission, there are 3 scopes of emission, right? When we are talking about, so scope 1 emission is something that you're producing as you're operating. Scope 2 is something that your products are producing as they're getting used. Scope 3 is something that your vendors are producing as they supply to you, right? So scope 3 is something that actually opens up your horizon of thought process. You're talking about, okay, I'm purchasing something, I'm a business and I'm purchasing something from a country or a company which is not respectful of the ESG requirements. So it adds or reduces your value, right? And you would see that the reporting frameworks that have come out also speaks a lot about how you're managing the ESG protocols in your supply chain. So we'll discuss all of that a bit later, but this is a brief of ESG, right? So we have moved away from financial performance. We're now talking about the triple bottom line. Yes, not everything can be converted into a monetary number, but we are pretty sure that achieving or voluntarily publicly announcing or reporting your performance in environmental and social areas would only add to your value, because not many companies do that right now, right? So let's talk about a bit about the evolution of ESG, right? So we as accountants have always understood stewardship slightly differently, right? So we consider that we are stewards of the resources that we handle, the money that we handle to the shareholders. The board of directors have a direct line of reporting to the shareholders, and they're held responsible for whatever profits that is being generated by the business. But today, given the wider horizon of ESG, we're talking about environmental, social as well, right? So we are not only talking about shareholders here. We're not only talking about the lenders here. We are talking about almost everybody, right? We are talking about unions. We are talking about people. We are talking about your impact on the planet, and therefore have different stakeholders, right? So we are now migrating from reporting which is centric to shareholders to a reporting which is centric to stakeholders. Now, stakeholders comes in different shapes and sizes, different varieties. Almost everybody in the world could be a stakeholder that way, right? But that's the reason why certain topics of ESG have become very broad and sometimes feels quite abstract. But given that it is evolving over a period of time, all of these would then be very well covered in various frameworks and very well defined, so that at the end of the day, most of the stakeholders are able to get whatever they need in order to assess the performance of a company. Mind you, not just the financial performance, but the triple bottom line, right? So we're talking more about responsible business conduct, right? We're talking about, okay, how do you take care of your people? How do you take care of your business model of distribution, your packaging, your product development? What product are you generating, and what is its end use throughout the life cycle of the product? It's not that you manufacture a fantastic product, sell it in the market, and you're done, right? You're now hooked on to the impacts that it is creating in the environment, in the people. And as you continue to manufacture those products, what else are those impacts that you are creating, right? So this can be very well communicated to the investors to the stakeholders in the form of a report. Now that report is referred to as ESG report, right? ESG reporting is something which is very critical in not just telling that this business is acknowledging the ESG risk, but also to tell them what their strategies are to mitigate those risks, what opportunities lie in those risks, because every risk has a corresponding opportunity. How does that company operate or identify those opportunities, and then report on performance, right? So all of this can be neatly the equity story, as we call it, or the story of the responsible business conduct could be enshrined in something called as the ESG reporting, right? And the ESG reporting is very well governed by different frameworks so far, right? And because each of these countries that we spoke of who had signed off to those commitments, which I'll briefly speak about in the next slide, all of them had their own runways for meeting those targets. All of them had come up with their own regulations in those respective countries, and hence different frameworks took birth in different countries, right? And therefore, like the accounting standards, we had different gaps in terms of ESG reporting as well, right? And we still continue to have them. Now, of course, you would think that, yeah, I mean, if IFRS is very well accepted across 126 odd countries, why can't we consolidate such framework for the purpose of reporting? Yes, that's happening, and I'll speak about that in the next couple of slides. Right, we are also talking, we have also seen as a trend a proliferation of the ESG centric indices that I spoke of. There is one in Dow Jones, there's one in India as well. Carbon index exists in different countries, and many companies have actually voluntarily registered for such list of companies to be valued by them. And of course, there's a process by which they have to do the reporting. There's an evaluation done for their compliance, and then they have the eligibility to get themselves registered there. And we have seen consistently that the companies who are registered there are better off in terms of share prices and their respect and brand when it comes to dealing with them, right? So all of this is taking shape. Like some of us may have realized that the environmental impact is real, and it is coming to bite us. A lot of things are taking shape, and we believe, and I personally believe, that over the next 3 to 4 years, a lot of activity will happen to streamline the reporting framework, the streamline the thought process, and acknowledging the environmental risk to be the highest priority for every business going forward, right? So now, if we look at a brief in terms of how every country is committed to achieving the ESG targets, right? Now, countries had signed off in COP21 way back in 2015 to a certain agreement called the Paris Accord. In the recent discussions about ESG, the true meaning of ESG and sustainability actually took birth in 2015. Right, of course, UN had done a lot of things before that, but all of those learnings and the frameworks culminated in certain targets and matrices that were agreed in the Paris Accord many years back in 2015, to which almost every country signed. Right, the COP26, the conference of participating members, it's called, that is also happening in the first week of November, and that's COP27, right? So that's going to happen, and it is those set of countries who have agreed to meet certain ESG targets, and there were pressures in the country to make sure that those are rolled out in the terms of policies, rolled out as regulations. So today, if you're talking about BRSR reporting in India, it's primarily because India had committed to certain targets, which I'm going to speak of in a few minutes. And the only way to ensure that those targets are met is by ensuring there is enough reporting on those targets, enough reporting on those matrices, not just for a particular organization, but for the whole country. So today, if you're talking about certain companies voluntarily doing sustainability reporting, it is just baby steps, right? We have millions of companies, millions of businesses in India, and India being one of the largest countries in the globe, we have a long way to go to come up with a very good sustainable reporting framework, data collection framework, and also reporting at the country level. Of course, these are nascent times. We are going to develop all of these things in the near future. In 2016, SDGs took birth, right? United Nations came up with the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 SDGs, and these have become the underpinning factors or the guiding factors, not just for economic businesses, but for governments as well, to be able to roll out, policies to help their population increase their per capita income, take care of biodiversity, take care of animals and flora and fauna and everything, right? So SDG is very broad based, and in 2016 a GRI framework was launched, right? So GRI, I will speak of that as well, is one of the most famous framework used for sustainability reporting. A little bit of that later. In 2017, the Financial Stability Board was incorporated, and you would see that all of these things are happening in very close time frames. And this is because the increasing need and the increasing acknowledgement of the fact that environmental risk are the highest priority that needs to be addressed today, right? TCFD took birth. There is a task force on climate related financial disclosures that was launched. I will speak to you about that in the subsequent slides. And in 2020 onwards, a lot of things have happened, right? And one of the most important thing that has happened is the creation of ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standard Board under the aegis of IFRS Foundation. Right, a bit of this again, which I will speak of at the end of this session, but you would see that a lot of activity has actually happened, and you would realize that a lot of things are actually shaping up today, and therefore we all have, as professionals, a time and an opportunity to be able to do the reset. So there are experts who in the GRI framework, there are experts in the integrated reporting framework, and today the surviving framework is going to be the ISSB framework, which is getting launched. The protocol standards have been announced. The first set of comment letters have gone. It is expected to be launched by December, and therefore, we all can start from zero, learn what is sustainable reporting, and that gives us a tremendous opportunity for all of us as professionals to learn something new, upskill ourselves, and of course, we are talking about assurance of ESG reporting and sustainability reporting, and that could be only a matter of time, then it becomes mandatory, right? So these are some thoughts about the evolution of ESG, right? Now let's talk about risks and opportunities in ESG. Now, why are we talking about risks here and also opportunities at the same time? Because each risk can be seen as an opportunity to add value to the value of the company, right? And here I'd like to introduce you to the recent report which was issued in April of this year by Sustainalytics, which actually is a global organization which lists out the key industries that have got impacted by ESG requirements, or which are actually having lower governance around ESG, or those which have a significant impact on the environmental and social aspects of the way they're doing business, right? These are considered. So the way it has got reported in that report is by analyzing the key material ESG issues that industry is dealing with, and the manner in which it is getting dealt, right? That results in some sort of a methodical way of rating that industry basis how they are addressing those risks and opportunities around it, and whether it's actually end of the tunnel for them, depending on the kind of industry you're in. Then they assign a risk rating for it, right? So the material issues, ESG issues that it brought about as part of the evaluation was business ethics, as one of the key risks. Now you would say business ethics has nothing to do with ESG, nothing to do with environment. No, you're wrong. We're talking about social as well, right? So business ethics would include, abiding with your regulatory requirements, your statutory requirements to do proper reporting, not doing corrupt practices, and therefore, your practices around that area would definitely be part of your ESG reporting, right? And you'd be surprised to know that in the recent past, the last 2 years, There have been two very large conglomerates in Japan who have fallen prey to business ethics, right? These are very large names. We always have cherished the products that they have manufactured, in a very unlikely country, which is known for the best behavior and culture. But business ethics is something that can pull down the valuation of a company in a big way, and not just because um, uh, they have vitiated certain regulatory requirements, but also the manner in which, or the behavior that they have inculcated with certain government authorities, which could be corrupt practices, could be could be a monopoly of sorts, right? So those are considered to be a significant risk as well in the ESG framework. We're talking also about product governance as one of the key risks, and that have gone into the rating of the industries, carbon production, greenhouse gas emissions of their own operations, and also of the products and the services that they offer, right? So that is something that you should think about, right? So if you're a large organization, or you are servicing your clients in different parts of the country, you use flight services, you fly from one city to another, let's say for audit or inventory count, you would think, I'm just providing services. What? I'm not polluting, right? Yeah. You yourself are not polluting, but you're consuming in your supply chain for providing services. You're consuming certain business services of another organization, which is highly polluting, right? So you would be surprised to know, for all the large international accounting and the audit firms, the highest risk in terms of ESG that was identified was not printing and stationery. That means you're using more paper, which is manufactured out of trees, which results in deforestation, right? So actually, the highest risk was flight travel, the emissions that you're creating, that you're responsible for having traveled from A to B by using flight services, right? So that is one good insight that you will get if you were to do something on your own businesses that you're generating, right, or you're operating in. Community relations is another yardstick. How are you managing your people, your unions, the tribal people around your area, depending on the kind of industry you're in, the emissions and the waste management, and so on and so forth. So these are the material ESG issues that have been enlisted in the report, and these are used as guiding factors for the reporting entities as well. So I'm talking about these because you'll find these very relevant when we speak about the ESG reporting or the sustainability reporting, right? So when you look at the key industries that have got impacted, and you will see that almost every company is in the red, right? Something that we believe as fundamental for the operation of the country is now in the red in terms of the ESG risk score, right? So what does that mean? We are talking about steel. Steel is in the red. Anything which is rated in excess of 30 means it is at severe risk of ESG. That means they are either polluting so much, or they're not managing the recycling. They're using something which is a natural resource and which is not renewable, right? And therefore, all of those adds up to the risks around ESG. Now, when you think about it, right, what does this mean, right? If you're an oil and gas company, you will see that they are in the red as well, right? You would say that it's end of the road for them, right? So, at some point we are using something which is a limited resource, and it would end. Should the company stop the business? What should it do? Can it think of different ways of providing similar service? Can it think of an alternate product that can be used instead of oil? Yeah, that is what is the ESG way of thinking. That means that if a company which is in the red is starting to think of how it is going to sustain itself over the next period of, say, 5 to 10 years, given the risks that it is operating under, finding opportunities in those risks and being sustainable over that period is the true meaning of ESG, right? Internalizing your ESG responsibilities, the way you conduct, the way your business model is built, is something that will be a very important change in your thought process. And these companies or these industries are are facing the headwinds today, right? So that is the sum and substance of what I'm talking about here. And the protocol standards that have been issued by ISSB actually speak of certain areas for assessing the risks and opportunities in the ESG space, right? So that is enumerated in the slide below, which talks of business model risks. We're talking about business strategy risk, cash flow, access to capital, and the cost of capital. So all of these are actually getting impacted by your ESG behavior. Today, we are talking about investors, right? Very large investors like BlackRock in the US, who have put ESG compliance as one of the key requirements for them to either lend money or to invest. So therefore, it is going to be reality that at some point in the future, companies who do not respect the ESG requirements are going to be penalized with lower funds or higher cost of capital, right? Which means that it is going to impact your financial performance in some fashion. So the business projections that you've given for, let's say, an intangible asset for the purpose of evaluating impairment is now going to stand, challenged, that you're not going to find, funds to manage your business for the next 10 years because ESG priorities are not being met or the targets you're not meeting, right? So those are now something that has now become a commonplace. In the US and the Europe, we have actually seen green bonds coming. We are actually seeing your interest rates fluctuating depending on how you're meeting your ESG targets. That means that your interest rates are not just based on your credit risk or your financial health, but also your acknowledgement of the ESG priorities and your performance in those parameters. So it is going to be only a matter of time that it is going to hit us in India and the rest of the world. But that's going to come, and that is how because everybody in the world is working towards a common vision of protecting the people, protecting the planet in the long run. Everybody is going to be impacted in some form or the other, right? So these are ways in which the reporting entities have to report in a very agile form what the risks are and what opportunities does it see in those risks, right? So moving on, why does ESG really matter to retail investors? Does it really matter to regulators? Basis whatever we have spoken so far, you would have realized that ESG adds tremendous value to the company, right? So the company can look forward to getting better valuation, better reputation, and better intangibles, right? So people would want to work with them, right? Even though they may not be the best paymasters, right? So those are intangibles which cannot be put a value to. You can't value such intangibles, right? Your competition would respect you. The products that you are going to manufacture is going to be highly sold in the market because you are producing something which is sustainable, right? And therefore you are also meeting the needs of the stakeholders. So if you are actually respecting the ESG requirements and you're internalizing that in your business strategies, the value of the company is going to be much higher, right? So therefore ESG matters to the company. In the same way for the retail investors as well, right? So if you are investing in a company which is ESG compliant or ESG responsible, you may or you will get better returns over a period of time, right? So today they may be not working on a very sustainable model, but today at least they are innovating, and the direction of travel is very clear, that they need to come up with an innovation that will allow them to do business in a very sustainable fashion, right? Regulators find it very, very useful because like I mentioned, each country has signed up to certain commitments, and the regulators would want to know how their businesses in the country is actually performing or meeting such matrices, and all of those would percolate down as regulations, reporting requirements, and certain other ways of regulation or enforcement, right? So all of those are definitely something which the regulators look forward to receiving as information and doing course correction as required basis the data that you collate out of such reporting that happens. Investment firms, yes, you would have realized, like the retail investor, he's also looking for good returns. You can't today invest in a company which is sunsetting, right? And it is not uncommon to have sunsetting industries, right? So at some point in time, The asbestos business was thriving across the world. Today, that business does not exist. It's toxic, right? Today, last few decades, we spoke about plastic in a big way. Plastic has made its way into the ocean. It has made its way into the air particles, in everything that we do, right? And perhaps in what we eat as well, right? But today, are we manufacturing the plastic that was manufactured 10 years back? No. We are manufacturing some more highly advanced plastic, which perhaps has lesser impact on environment, lesser impact on people who are consuming it, and so on, right? But at the end of the day, we definitely need to find a replacement for plastic, right? So if you're investing in a company which has only plastic business, you need to think twice. You need to now think about what is the management doing to find or to find these risks, and also what opportunities are they actually identifying in order to get out of or manage those risks, right? At the end of the day, only those are going to add value to the enterprise, and therefore we as investors and the investment firms are looking for better valuation, right? So ESG is not only for businesses, it's for everybody, retail investors, regulators, companies, and the investment firms alike, right? So now a brief on, before I get on to ESG reporting, a few minutes more on how do we see ESG changing the business landscape. Okay, now have we actually noticed over the past few months, if you're getting Amazon packages or even Flipkart packages being delivered, the amount of plastic has gone down, right? You may also have seen the food delivery companies switching over to paper packaging, and not just plastic, which was heavily used when they were new. And you would see that these are small changes that they are making to not just be seen as ESG compliant or somebody who is considered to be doing a responsible business, but actually also to tell to the customers that they are actually responsible for whatever they're doing. Their business activities have an impact on environment and they are responsible for it, and they are managing those risks, right? So that's a very important takeaway. And all of these things are something that we all are exposed to on a day-to-day level, right? So this is what I'm talking about. So ESG thought process actually defines, or gives you a direction of your business strategy and a business model, your product development and product delivery, and your product management throughout the life cycle of that product, right? So that is the true value of ESG. So we are not talking about report, comply or report, right? We're not talking about here's the checklist, just tell me whatever you're doing and whatever you're not doing, and just be done with it, and report it in your annual report. That's not what we're talking about. ESG is far more than just a checklist approach, right? We're talking about understanding your value chain creators, understanding where the impacts are, your interactions with the different natural resources, with people. Where are you creating those risks? Where are you creating those impacts? What are you doing to mitigate those impacts, right? So that actually has an impact across your organization, right? So we're not talking about just the production. We're also talking about inward freight, for example, material receipt. We're talking about outward transport logistics. We're talking about consumer service, consumer management, product management, HR policies, and everything that we're talking about, right? So therefore, the ESG framework and the thought process has a bearing on everything that the company is doing in some way or the other, right? So internalizing the ESG priorities when you're a board member, making sure that the policies that you're setting for that organization is ESG compliant and responsibly performs activities across different streams of revenues and operations that it has, would mean that you have now started thinking about environment and social in your day-to-day activity, right? So there's a maturity model which SRSP has come up with, which is our own institute. And we will talk about this in the next few slides, but this is just a pictorial presentation of the fact that ESG sometimes is voluntarily driven, but most of the time we have seen that it has to be enforced by regulation and the investors. But at the end of the day, it gets internalized as part of the the whole behavior of the organization. Now let's talk about ESG reporting, right? So we have spoken so far about the environmental impact of a business, why ESG has now entered the top priority list of the C-suite, the investors, and how they should manage those risks and opportunities. But of course, we've just, like I said, it's just an introductory session. It's not highly detailed, but at least I hope you would have got a slight glimpse of what we're talking about when it comes to environmental risks and opportunities. Now we will briefly talk about ESG reporting, which is the talk of town. And given that we all are in the area of reporting, financial reporting, we find this very interesting and relevant for us, right? So ESG reporting is nothing but, like I mentioned a few minutes back, is a way of communicating your ESG strategies to the stakeholders. We're not talking about shareholders now. For the rest of the session, we are going to talk about stakeholders, right? So what are the things that you're doing to manage your ESG risks and opportunities, and how are you articulating your story is the in thing about ESG reporting, right? So what are the real drivers about ESG reporting? You would see sustainability is the underpinning requirement. What is the organization doing for climate change? How is it managing its emissions in terms of water pollution, in terms of air? How is it managing its solid waste? What kind of water are you using? How are you recycling it? All of that becomes something which would drive your ESG reporting at a particular organization. Of course, it's a very wide area, and depending on the nature of business you're in, the industry you're in, the way you're going to write your story will be different. There will be material risks that you would identify for the purpose of reporting, which could be different depending on the kind of business you're in, and also the impact you're going to have on the environment. From a social standpoint, you're talking about well-being of your people. Are you paying minimum wages? Innovation in your products? What are you doing to the community? Are you displacing tribals? Are you displacing natural habitat? Employment and the skilling and the upskilling of the people. Those are some of the drivers that could result in a good ESG reporting. And then finally, governance. None of these would have any value if the governing policies around these to monitor and to hold people responsible in the organization is not put in place. So the governance aspect of that is considered to be a very high value adding reporting requirement, which the users of the financial statements would want to trust on, right? In the sense, if there is a breach of a protocol, would that be reported? Would that be spotted? Is somebody monitoring whatever you're claiming? Right? Is there a good way of data gathering so as to do a proper reporting in your ESG report or annual report? So those are the governance aspect. So these are the few drivers of your ESG reporting framework, and not just reporting framework, but the overall corporate value that you're going to generate out of such thinking. Now, like I said, sometimes we need a regulator and to push down and to enforce what is required in ESG. And you would see that these are the key drivers of ESG reporting, right? So when we speak about the ISSB, we will also talk about who the stakeholders are who are forming the foundation. You would see there is enough representation from the industry, from the regulators, from the customers, and also from environmental activists. So it's a cohesive group of such very thinking experts who are on the board, and who would then have a better way of deciding what is material in terms of reporting and what is relevant when it comes to ESG reporting. So some of the drivers of ESG reporting are, first of all, the environmental commitments that a country has signed up to, your government or the regulators that you're seeing, your customers, and the way in which you're operating your business, right? So most of these are something that we have actually seen. We also have spoken about how investment is flowing into those responsible businesses more at very favorable rates in comparison to those who do not acknowledge ESG as their priority in their business model, right? So I'd like to also briefly speak about the sustainability reporting maturity model, version 1.0, which was launched by our own institute, SRSP in India. Sustainability Reporting Standards Board, it's called. So we also have a separate institute which has board for promulgating the reporting standards under sustainability. And this is one of the publications that came out sometime last year, which actually very beautifully and in a very crisp fashion provides yardstick of measuring at what level of maturity is an organization in when it comes to sustainability reporting. Right, there are 4 levels that it has come up with. Right, in the same fashion as you would have CMMI in terms of technology and so on. Right, so in the same way, this is for sustainability reporting. There are 4 levels. They are the stages. One is the formative stage. Second one is the emerging stage. Third is the established, and fourth is leading by example. Right. So, depending on what is your BRSR score, right? So BRSR is something that I've not spoken of so far, but it's just the reporting framework that exists in the sustainability arena in India, which I will briefly introduce you to in the subsequent slide, but has a scoring methodology, right? So if your score is less than 25%, it only means that you're now forming your policies around ESG, you're acknowledging the fact that you're responsible for your business conduct and the environmental impact and social impact. So you're actually now going through the requirement and then evaluating your answers and your responses to that activity. Emerging stage is where you score between 25 to 50%, and this is where they actually see BRSR not just as compliance, but as something that adds value to the organization. And they are now developing robust mechanism for reporting, robust mechanism for policy setting around the ESG framework. And it is holding people within itself responsible for ESG matrices, and also has internal controls around the matrices for the purpose of reporting. Right. Established stages where all of those policies that have been put in are actually yielding results, right? So that is where you say that you are an established, you're in the established stage, fairly matured organization when it comes to ESG reporting. And finally, you're exceeding, you are thinking about ESG in every step of the way. Your business development, your product development, and your business strategies are driven by your ESG priorities. That's when we say that you are actually a leader when it comes to ESG reporting and thought process. So that is a brief about the maturity model that exists, and I would really urge you to at least download that report, download that publication which SRSP has published last year. It's called Sustainability Reporting Maturity Model, that is SRMM version 1.0. Of course, this is evolving, and this is where you would assess your clients' preparedness when it comes to ESG reporting. And I would not be surprised that 95% of our clients would be in the formative stage, right? Which is a good thing. At least we are starting in the journey, and that's where I would say 50% of the war is won. That is where the true journey actually starts, right? So that is the sustainability reporting maturity model. Now, over the next 15 minutes, I will not get into too much of details, but I would like to briefly introduce you to the key reporting frameworks that exists in the ESG arena, right? Each of these are actually a set of standards, and each of these are a subject matter for experts to be in, right? So you can be an expert in GRI, you can be an expert in TCFD, and a lot more in the integrated reporting framework, which are now going to be confluencing into one framework, which I will speak of. But until now, these frameworks have served us very well when it comes to reporting in the ESG arena. Now, sustainability reporting, which encompasses all these frameworks, have originated in different parts of the world. Some of them have been originated from a neutral organization like the UN or the FSB, but some of them are really, region specific, right? So, for example, CDP is region specific, UN is not regional specific, but there are some disclosure requirements which are like there's a new framework for EU, so that's region specific, right? But but you'll be surprised that even though they may be region specific, it has an impact on the whole of the world, because those regulation covers the whole supply chain, not just the operations of that enterprise. So I'll briefly discuss about this later, but I'd like to introduce very briefly in each one slide dedicated for each of these the various frameworks that exists here. Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, is one of the most accepted and famous framework in the world of sustainable reporting, right? And you would realize by the statistics on the slides that there is huge amount of acceptability of this framework for the purpose of reporting. And there are 3 universal standards of general disclosures and management approaches, which are used for the purpose of writing the story of ESG of that particular company. Now, this actually is a very detailed topic in itself, and it is considered to be a gold standard in sustainability reporting, right? So GRI exists, and it is the most accepted framework for reporting. So you would see on the stats there, really 44% of S&P 500 have used it, 92% of the world's largest 250 companies have used it, 23,000 companies have issued public reports around it. SMEs have actually used this as a reporting framework. So I think this is considered to be a gold standard. And in fact, some of the framework that have come subsequent to GRI have actually borrowed a lot from what is already existing here. And in fact, the regulations that are burgeoning across different countries have actually borrowed on the matrices which are there in the GRI framework as a guiding factor for setting their own individual matrices. So that is GRI for you. Then you got the Global Compact, right? So the UN Global Compact is another set of principles, basis which reporting is done. It is fairly an easy structure, as I understand, and it includes both qualitative and quantitative, narrative about their story of ESG. And generally, large cap companies and listed entities across the world have found this to be useful and use them for the purpose of reporting, right? So many of the reports that you would see in India as well have followed the GRI framework. Many companies like the Tatas, the Reliance of the world have actually come up with an integrated report in their annual reports, which I would request each one of you to have a look at to get a glimpse of how a sustainability report looks like, right? And you would see that there is actually a lot of linkages between different frameworks, which is mentioned in the report as well. So there is linkage between UN SDGs, BRSR, and GRI and IR framework in all of these reports that you can download and verify. So UNGC is another such report which exists, and but not as rigorous as something that we spoke of as GRI, or something that we will speak as part of SASB framework. TCFD is Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosures. Now, this was issued by the FSB. Of course, now this is now part of the ISSB, which is the IFRS Foundation. But this was only related to climate related disclosures, right? So therefore it is not talking so much about the other aspects of ESG like social, but this is mainly in terms of the climate related risks and opportunities that need to be disclosed. Of course, like with any other framework, it has qualitative aspects and the quantitative aspects. And nearly large cap companies in the developed world, and primarily in the US and UK, have used this as a reference point for developing their sustainability reports. SASB is in the US, which is the brother or the sister board of FASB. This is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and here this was region specific. This was for the US as a country, and again, a lot of acceptability in the US. More than 7,000 companies have used this for filing purposes. And many of the time, because it's not a mandatory thing, investors have specifically asked for it, or customers have asked for it, basis which such reporting has got done. Okay, and this is considered to be fairly broad, and perhaps would also see the same things appearing, or guiding the ISSB as well, which I will speak to you later about. It actually speaks about issues and opportunities around 5 categories, which is environmental, social, human capital, business model, and leadership. So fairly something that resonates with BRSR as well. Now, the most other popular reporting framework after GRI is the IR framework, which is the integrated reporting framework. Now, this foundation also does not exist today because it is now part of the ISSB. Integrated reporting has actually been one of the landmark frameworks that have brought in pick and mix approach to disclosure. It has actually introduced and defined different capitals, not just the financial capital. There are other capitals like human capital, intellectual capital, resource capital. There are 6 capitals that have now been defined by the framework, which adds value to the enterprise, right? So that is the integrated reporting. There is a lot of guidance around what should be reported under each of those capitals, what risks are managed, and what is the governing factors around those aspects. So all of this then creates an integrated reporting framework, which is very elaborate and covers almost all areas, or even more than what is considered by GRI in a way, or TCFD, for example. UN SDGs have been the guiding factor. SDGs, there are 17 SDGs. The SDGs are called Sustainable Development Goals. I would also urge you participants to have a look at the SRSB website, where there are brief videos about each of those SDGs, what it means. So we're talking about poverty, we're talking about climate change, biodiversity, animals or fishes under the water. There's talk about medical health and so on. So there are 17, which is cutting across different aspects of the way we operate, and generally benefiting the mankind and the planet. Of course, not compromising on the development. It's about the cautious development which takes care of the people and the planet at the same time. So SDGs are then broken down into various goals, and there are close to 143 such goals, and most of these goals are quite broad based. And have been the guiding factors for countries to roll out, policies. So some things like, Rozgar Yojana, their CSR policies in India have actually found some bit of vision from these global goals that we have signed up to. Right, so this is the SDGs. So SDGs, the principles there, and the GRI framework, and all the frameworks are actually interlinked in a way, because the vision of all the frameworks have been the same, right? So when a particular customer or a particular regulator wants GRI framework, for example, so when you create your sustainability report, there is generally a table given as to where the GRI framework compliance measures are reported, where UN SDG compliance measures are reported, and so on. So it's all interlinked. So BRSR versus SDG, BRSR versus integrated reporting, GRI can actually be depicted in those tables. And I would really urge you to have a look at some of the sustainability reporting frameworks, or the reports that large companies in India have actually published in India. So I'll not spend too much time on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We've spoken about this. It's a separate index for sustainability. We also have a similar thing in India. There is CDP, which is the Carbon Disclosure Project. It's a non-profit organization. A lot of investors have subscribed to that. And therefore, the investors request the investees to be in compliance with the disclosure project, again concentrating on the emissions and the carbon footprint of the business that is being invested in. Right, UNPRI is the principles for responsible investing. So my apologies for having to introduce so many frameworks around this, because the fact that these were developed in different points in time, and with different focus, addressing different stakeholders, hence the reason why we have so many frameworks today, right? And hence it is also the need of the hour to consolidate them, which I will speak to you about in the next few minutes. So PRI is actually responsible investing framework. And what happens in this framework is that any company which meets a particular criteria which is there in the on their website could actually subscribe and say that I'm meeting this criteria, and we are responsible for continuing to meet these criteria, and they sign up to this, right? And that means that they now have access to the investor community who are also signed up to the responsible investing. So therefore, the fund flow or the evaluation of the investee is far more easy when it comes to ESG matters. So this is one such framework that exists. Now, yes, we have spoken about a lot of framework. Now, you would have realized that, yes, dealing with too many frameworks would only mean that we're going to miss something, or it is highly focusing on one particular framework or one particular stakeholder. So there was a need, a pressing need to consolidate all frameworks, right? So in the November of last year, in COP26 itself, the formation of ISSB was announced under the victory badge of IFRS being accepted across 126, 130 odd countries in the world. It was globally accepted that the IFRS Foundation has the wherewithal and the process and machinery to be able to promulgate sustainability standards across the world in the best way possible, right? And therefore, everybody, all the framework owners, all the framework representatives then signed up to forming one board, which is referred to as the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is now part of the IFRS Foundation. It is now a sister of IASB, which churns out IFRS reporting standards, right? So financial reporting standards. Now, ISSB is now operational. They had their first meeting last month. It took some time for the board to be constituted, given the rigorous requirement of representation across different frameworks. It took some time. Of course, there were political push and pull happening, but it's now all done. So ISSB is there. They have actually rolled out 2 prototype standards, right? They are referred to as IFRS S1 and IFRS S2, right? And you will be surprised by how large those standards are, and these are not standards which are like 30 pages or 40 pages long. The S2 is nearly 600 pages long, right? So ISSB has already launched the prototype standards, which is out for comments, and the letter comment timeline have actually elapsed now. One good thing that has happened as part of ISSB is the broad-based offices that they have. Now, ISB has office only in London, right? But now, considering the fact that the ESG risks are spread across the world in a different way with different likelihood and impact, the ISSB offices are actually spread across the world. You know, in the map, you would see there is an office in the US, Canada, UK, Germany, and China and Japan, right? Not one in India, but our closest is China, where the ISSB office is going to be. Now, a little bit about the prototype standards. The first one is the general requirement for disclosures, which is some sort of like a conceptual framework which defines what is enterprise value, what are the basic underpinning requirements of sustainability reporting, comparability, materiality, and all that, which is there, and also gives some bit of flexibility of using SASB standards as well until such time the ISSB comes up with a full suite of standards for the purpose of sustainability reporting. Now, you would be wondering, how long will it take for ISSB to come up with these standards, right? Now, I could give you some insights on that. It is likely that over the next couple of quarters, you will get a suite of standards being already in the form of exposure draft. Like the prototype came in a jiffy, right? And we all knew that while the SSP was getting formed, there was a task force already on non-financial reporting already created, which was already working on consolidating all the reporting frameworks that exist even before the ISSB was formed. And that was to get a head start, and it is expected that some of these standards will actually be applicable from 1st of January 24 for certain companies in the developed countries. And it's only a matter of time that it'll trickle down to the rest of the world. And we have seen active participation in borrowing those standards. The SRSP is very, very active in India. The BRSR is ahead of its time currently when it comes to, it's quite up to the mark when it comes to matching the SDGs or the requirement under the GRI framework, but not as elaborate. Right now, the BRSR is still some sort of a checklist, but yes, it's a good start. And therefore, it's only a matter of time that you will have to deal with several standards in the next 2 to 3 quarters itself, which will be out for exposure draft and final reporting by 24 or 25 maximum, 2024 and 2025. So the second prototype standard is around climate related disclosures. This is the standard which has 600 pages in it. And of course, this is primarily because they are specific matrices that have been identified by industry. So depending on which industry the reporting entity is in, the relevant sections in the standard would be applicable as a guiding factor of what quantitative aspects you will report and certain guidance on the qualitative aspect. So all of this is there in the prototype standard S2. Now, one thing before we get on with BRSR, I'm conscious of the time, but something that you will find very interesting is the dual materiality concept, right? So we have been auditors. We compute materiality the way we have always done, using a benchmark, which is PBT or revenue, as the case may be. You take a percentage of that and say, and assign a materiality value to it. That's a monetary number. Now, when it comes to ESG, they cannot be a monetary number, right? So we discussed that in the introduction. So what is that concept of dual materiality? Now, the materiality for financial purpose is one thing, and materiality for ESG reporting is another, right? So the materiality is based on what impact are you making in the environment, which is not very much fully known at the moment, but you at least know how the environment is impacting you because you are controlling or managing that risk, right? So that is the difficulty in the dual materiality concept. One is the financial number, which is easy to compute. The other one is a materiality concept, which is very broad and abstract right now, right? So and therefore dealing with two materialities would create confusion in what is material when it comes to sustainability reporting, right? So therefore this is again going to evolve, but dual materiality is expected to stay, right? And that is something that we all have to come to terms with. And what has also come up as a matter of discussion is the dynamic materiality. Now, what is dynamic materiality? Something which is a risk today, which is material today, may not be of high material risk in the next year, right? Or sometime in the future. So that means this assessment of what is material and what is not is considered to be continuous, and therefore it is not a static assessment, and every year you could come up with different evaluations and conclusions, right? So that adds to the complications of sustainability reporting, right? So that is the concept of dual materiality and the dynamic materiality, which you'll have to deal with. Now, let's talk very briefly about the framework. We spoke about frameworks across the world. Let's talk about the framework in India, right? India has not been away from what is happening outside India. In fact, we've been very, very proactive, and you'll be surprised to know that this kind of reporting has actually been in the works for the past 20 years in different form, right? So the latest framework that we are dealing with is the NGRBC framework. This is the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct, which was launched in 2018. Now, 2018 launch version actually aligns with the SDGs, actually, because SDGs came about after the voluntary guidelines existed. So the previous version of NGRBC was the voluntary guidelines for responsible business conduct for social and environmental activities. So that's another one that required an update after the SDGs were launched in 2016, and in 2018 a comprehensive framework in the form of NGRBC was launched. Now, again, because we don't have a centralized framework, we have now come up with our own principles. There are 9 principles basis which the business conduct should happen in India, and those 9 principles have further core elements. Furthermore, elaboration of how those principles can be achieved. Those are referred to as core elements. There are several core elements for each of those principles, and those actually are driving force for the BRSR report that has now become mandatory for the top 1000 listed entities in India for year ended March 23. So 22-23 is the year when listed entities, the top 1000 listed entities, are actually going to report under the BRSR framework. Now, BRSR is a reporting framework which actually is a notification which tells you what you need to do when it comes to reporting. But NGRBC is the actual framework for ESG and business conduct in India. So a brief about BRSR. So this is actually principle wise. There's a lot of qualitative and quantitative aspects that actually go into sustainability reporting, right? Right now, the BRSR is fairly quantitative, right, in terms of and fairly checklist based. Of course, it is something that is a fantastic start for companies who have never done ESG reporting or sustainability reporting in the past. And therefore, I would also like to request all the participants to have a look at that BRSR checklist, and you'll be surprised to see the gamut of reporting that it covers. It covers all the 9 principles. There is a way of aligning those 9 principles with the SDGs, and that form part of your report. And there is actually a light version of the BRSR report. So light version is applicable for other companies who are not covered in this in 22-23 reporting, and who would want to voluntarily do this, and they can actually do a light version. Now, even in the mandatory version, there are 2 types of reporting, 2 types of matrices that you can give. One is referred to as the essential, and the other one is the leadership. Essential would mean that these are the minimum mandatory things that you need to report on, whereas leadership would mean that these are voluntary disclosures. That means, you might not have it, so you don't need to disclose, but if you have it, please go ahead and disclose such matrices also. So this is the BRSR. It is now going to be applicable for all listed entities, the top 1000 listed entities for the year 22-23. Now, lastly, let's talk about assurance of the sustainability report. So just to recap of what we have discussed so far over the past 1.5 hours is we've spoken about environmental risks, social risks. We've introduced the sustainability as a concept, ESG reporting as a concept, the frameworks that exist in ESG reporting, what ESG reporting exists in India in a very brief way, right? So each of the topics that we have discussed today is worthy of having workshops, right? So each topic can be covered over a workshop of 4 to 5 days. It's actually very detailed, research that can be done against each, covering all of those that we have covered so quickly today. Right. So let's talk about now the assurance framework for the reports that are getting generated. So it's only a matter of time that the sustainability reports that are being churned out by the reporting entities would be required to be audited. Today, there is no such requirement. The sustainability report that are generated by the companies can be printed on their annual report as is, or could be subjected to audit voluntarily. Having said that, given the profession that we are in and the expectation of the stakeholders and the investors, they tend to believe more if the report is actually audited. And therefore, many companies, even in India, who resort to reporting to GRI or the sustainability reports, get those reports audited, right? So, and therefore, what auditing frameworks do we use, right? So current auditing framework that we use are relating to financial reporting, right? So that is what we are conversant with, and that's what we have actually done so far. Now, just yesterday, as Pramod and the chairman said in the introduction, the exposure draft has been issued by SRSP in relation to the assurance standard for sustainability reports, which is SSAE 3000. Now, SSAE 3000 is actually resonating with ISAE 3000, which is the international ISAs, basically International Standards on Auditing, and which has been the most commonly used auditing framework for issuing reports on sustainability reports. There is also another assurance report, assurance standard called AA 1000. These are referred to as accountability assurance standards, right? So they have also had a lot of acceptance across the world as a referring point for performing audit procedures to be able to give an opinion on the sustainability reporting, right? So this is, like I said, it's only a matter of time that sustainability reporting in a big way is going to hit us, all the reporting entities in India. It's also only a matter of time that all of these reports are going to be subjected to audit, right? So therefore, like I said, in India, SRSB has been very, very proactive in coming up with these requirements, or upskilling or creating that infrastructure to enable such thing. It has come as no surprise that the exposure draft on the SSA 3000 is already out, which is a commendable effort from our institute. So that is a bit about the assurance framework in the ESG environment. So with this, I'd like to conclude my session today. I hope you have found some takeaways, and we hope that it will entice you to do some more research on ESG, upskill ourselves towards certain aspect of ESG, and commit ourselves to being a responsible citizen, a responsible service provider, and responsible business owner, so that our global vision of saving the planet and the mankind is actually achieved over a period of time. So with that, I'd like to thank each one of the participants for patient listening, and the Institute for providing me this opportunity to make this session happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. There are some questions in the chat box.
Yeah. I'll look
and
at it.
Q&A.
Yes. The first question is, given the current focus on the ESG compliance on organization, do you foresee similar push focus on individuals in future, whereby, say, a sustainable score will be assigned to an individual? Like, wow, that's quite forward thinking. I hope and wish that day comes. I think it is a very nascent stage right now. We're trying to hold accountable the businesses and the countries to be acknowledging ESG risk and scoring them. But I think the direction of travel is clear. Perhaps all of us are going to be rated for ESG scores. I hope this happens. I think that was one of the questions I had.
Q&A, one more
Q&A.
question.
The names of 5 companies and how effective has it been? Also, your thoughts on greenwashing in terms of ESG reporting, right? So 5 names of companies who have done ESG reporting. So you can look at Reliance, you can look at Airtel, you can look at Vedanta, you can look at Infosys, Wipro. So that's 5, and there are many more actually. You could look at them to get an understanding of how the report looks. Greenwashing is another terminology that has come about. Greenwashing means that only words, only lip service, basically, right? So you're saying that I've done this, my product is capable of doing this, but actually it does not trickle into something which is actually quantifiable, which is actually visible to the users of the financial statement or the public at large. So that is greenwashing. That means you're giving a different color to what you're actually doing, right? So that is greenwashing. Please stay away from greenwashing, because that's not the real spirit of ESG. Right? I think that's the only
yes, sir.
questions I had.
Thank you, Pradeep sir. Very well brought out introduction. It's comprehensively covered all the areas. We look forward for a bigger session on this topic once, maybe after this audits, because a lot of things to learn here. Maybe we can have a bigger session. I thank for your time and efforts in sharing a valuable knowledge. I thank on behalf of Bangalore branch of ICA, sir. I request our MCS Secretary Pramod Hegde to propose a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. And special thanks to our session leader today, who gave us a very informative session. And of course, even in the short notice, when I approached you, you immediately acknowledged and you said you're ready to go for this session. Thank you, sir. And definitely, of course, we would have loved to have everyone in the physical presence. We thought this would be a physical come session, but unfortunately, I think our members are used to, and considering the tax audit season, we can understand. But we look forward for all the members to come and join us for the upcoming programs. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
And thank you so much, Mr. Srinivas and Pramod, for giving me this opportunity. I really honor this opportunity. Thank you so much. See you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.